The Constitution protects our inalienable rights, reflecting the truth that our freedoms come from God, not government. It enshrines the principle of we the people, affirming power belongs to citizens, not rulers, and the government exists to serve the people, not the other way around. Because the framers understood the temptations of power, they divided authority among 3 branches of government, each designed to check the others. They also balanced the powers of the federal government and the states. Our Constitution ensures that Americans live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. May it ever be so.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this hour of the Sean Thompson Show is sponsored exclusively by DonleyAuctions.com. They need your guns. Sell for top dollar. DonleyAuctions.com.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Sean Thompson. And this is the Sean Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
I believe the education system in this country, since Howard Zinn started to write books for school, has been so bastardized, these public schools specifically, but not exclusively, are guilty of malpractice, and that is the current climate of our country. The good news is it can be combated. It can be combated through people and the efforts of people like my next guest, who is the president and CEO of Palladium Pictures, LLC, an independent film company that he launched in 2023 with his wife, executive producer Gino Capopac. And Palladium focuses on high quality, fact, about patriotism, about information, and the new one is about the lockdown dissidents that we experienced under the greatest example of fascism this country's ever seen, in my opinion. He is the producer-director of the Lockdown Dissidents, president and CEO of Palladium Pictures, Michael Pack. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm happy to be on your show. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm fascinated with what you've done in a very short period of time. You've really kicked out some fantastic documentaries. And this one is very interesting as well. And I do want to talk about the past ones, especially Hamilton. I'm very curious to know. But what we lived through during COVID was surreal to me. And, you know, I'm older, and I changed my life. I had a head start of what I wanted to do in retirement or quasi-retirement. I don't think real men retire, but that's just me. So I implemented that because to live under the Democrat fascism that I saw in my once great city, once great state, I couldn't believe what happened in Chicago, Illinois. I couldn't believe it. But it was no different than New York or L.A., and it was really a division of the country. And I was proud to be a dissident. I didn't buy a word of that nonsense. Is that what your documentary focuses on?
It does. I mean, this is part of a partnership that we've launched with the Wall Street Journal opinion section to do short documentaries, about 30 minutes, on important issues and events that have been misreported or memory hold. This is our third. Your listeners can find them all. They're free. They're not behind the Wall Street Journal paywall at wsj.com/opinion docs, or go to our website, palladiumpictures.com. And this one tries to tell the story of the lockdowns in a brief time. I mean, we all lived through it, but it's amazing how people have sort of forgotten it or maybe never put it all together. So we start with a lockdown beginning in Wuhan, or the pandemic beginning in Wuhan. And, you know, Wuhan locked down in a way never seen before. You know, they were sealing people in their homes, dragging people to detention centers. And then the World Health Organization went and declared it a great success, and it became the model. And it had never been tried before in a pandemic. And we focus on the people who began to collect evidence that it wasn't working, scientists primarily and epidemiologists. So in March, one of them, Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the head of the NIH and was then a professor at Stanford, launched a study. It said declared that already proved conclusively that COVID disproportionately affected older people, and the smart approach was to focus, what he called focus protection, focus your attention on isolating older people, let young people go about their business, and particularly no reason to close schools. But he was roundly denounced at the time, as were others like Scott Atlas that we focus on. And then we look at what happened inside the COVID task force. We have Robert Redfield, who was then head of CDC. Scott Atlas was on the task force, and how those views were marginalized. And then when Jay and two other scientists wrote the Great Barrington Declaration in October of 2020, they were actually denounced. Francis Collins, head of the NIH at the time, wrote to Tony Fauci saying these are fringe epidemiologists, even though they were from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford, and there needed to be a devastating takedown rather than a debate. And they acted to suppress it. And we traced this through to the Twitter files after Elon Musk bought Twitter. And it was, conclusively proven that the government had acted to suppress this information. It approached Facebook and Twitter and others and told them to deboost or shadow ban these ideas. And I think that it's a time, just to hark back to something you said earlier, Sean, where really our freedoms were totally abridged. I mean, in this case, freedom of speech. And I think freedom of speech, I value my freedom of speech, but I think it's particularly important in science. Science thrives on debate. And this happened, and they suppressed our other freedoms, too. I mean, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion. Churches were shut down, and we Americans gave that up to the government. We shouldn't do it again.
No, and you know what's so infuriating? There's a couple of layers of infuriation. But however, what I find amazing... What I find amazing is they did all of those things and more, and yet the accusation of me, of Trump and people like me, is that we support a king. It is I'd be flabbergasted if I could be that articulate. But when you live through this, the thing to always focus on is that the enemy of all men, regardless of your wealth, no matter what your circumstance, is time. They stole our time. They changed the course and the trajectory of every individual's life, and I'm guaranteed as an American for that not to happen. So for me to play nice now, I got to tell you something, Michael. I'm the kind of guy where if you cheat me out of $10, I go to your house, I flip over your table and beat you up in front of your wife. I don't like this. I don't like that I'm supposed to take it. How do you explain the politeness of Americans who should be the dissidents, always and forever?
It's an amazing thing. We pride ourselves on being rugged individualists, but the government asked us to surrender our unalienable rights, and we did. And as Scott Atlas says, if they can be taken by the government, they're not unalienable. And they were promised to us as 250 years ago, as we're celebrating this week, by the Declaration of Independence and later enumerated in the Bill of Rights, and we gave them up. I think we are just used to the rule of experts. And we should not be. I mean, you say government, the accusation of President Trump is a king. Well, in this period, he gave up too much of his power to Tony Fauci, Deborah Birx, and others. He knew, he had a sense that it was wrong, but he didn't, he would not do it in the second term, but he allowed that to be, the official government policy, well after the evidence that social distancing, masks didn't work. That was the guidance from the COVID task force. And, it's a real case study. And, I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, a very blue suburb of Washington, D.C., and there were plenty of thank you, Dr. Fauci lawn signs during that period. And I think most of my neighbors still think Dr. Fauci was a hero. So the purpose of the documentary is to really expose what happened, but not in a kind of, not in a deeply opinionated way. We intend to tell it as a story, and it's an amazing, incredible story. We lived through it, but it's still incredible. And we want to just lay out the facts for people to see and remind people of what they went through and how it all played out over time, which people really forget. People try to move on. People try to put it behind them. But I think there's a lesson to be learned, as you said, or they're going to do it again. And people should be angry. You mentioned you were angry. I think that's the right response, and I hope that we can get people to feel that way.
Well, see, and the other aspect of our circumstance, we're hoisted by our own petard of politeness. We're hoisted by that, and we're hoisted by the fact that we see ourselves as too sophisticated, to demand the kind of righteousness that is in order here. You see, I was suspicious from day one, and I'm going to tell you why, Michael. I could see how smart you. I mean, and I say this really, I mean it. I know how smart you are. I know how wonderful this is, and the people who you deal with, how smart they are. But ultimately, it's about the money. And when you look at the money that transferred here, when you're talking trillions, not billions anymore, trillions of dollars, not just on the national debt, but was stolen in real time. And it's a funny little circumstance that I was wondering if, I don't think this came out in time for you to include it, but the money that was allowed to be stolen from the American people and really the future, because the people didn't have the money, it was created out of debt. And right now in Chicago, which as you know, is the mafia, short in the pants, Democrat capital of America. A judge just allowed 2 crooked doctors that run a ghetto hospital to steal over $800 million in fraud money that was created during COVID. Fraud. They stole the money in PPP, in the phony tests that they did. And another one, there's 3 guys at one hospital. He stole $300 million, and he's going to get his case dismissed because the federal prosecutors are tied up in some form of a allegation that they did something improper for protesters for immigration in a month. So they threw out these cases where they stole the money 3 years ago. So it doesn't mean anything if we don't take these people who robbed us and make them pay. And I think the greatest example, in my opinion, is Fauci, who orchestrated and concocted and financed the creation of the bioweapon and then released it with EcoHealth Alliance and all the money. So this is aside from the virus and what it was and all of it, I believe it was a concocted and created bioweapon to steal trillions of dollars from the future in the form of debt. And who asked the question? Trump can't, because he bought it, like you said in the beginning. So he's in for a penny, he's in for a pound. Don't you think this should be the mantra of the next generation, to run to prosecute the people who swindled us?
I think so. I mean, when you shovel money out like the trillions that were shoveled out in the beginning of the Biden administration, corruption follows, and they probably had a sense that would happen. But, the Fauci thing, I think the other robbing that you mentioned earlier is very significant. People were really robbed of their time. And, I'm older, too. You mentioned you're a little older. And I think especially young people, these young kids that were in, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade during this time, lost these years of schooling. They were kind of, set off. It's not just the schooling. They were off track. There was all the suicide ideation. They'll never get it back. And it disproportionately hurt poor kids. Rich kids had parents that had plenty of internet access and could teach the classes to them because they were home anyway. Poor kids, their parents were working in one of those, either food stores or truckers, and they had, they would be, not even phoning in, or if they were zooming into their classes, or if they were turning the camera off.
Yeah.
They lost something really valuable, and America lost something. So did the world. We lost. I think the work ethic was hurt. People were working from home, doing no work, and I mean, it was and businesses shut down that'll never come back. And I mean, these things are really, money is important, and I completely agree with the corruption. But hand in hand in that is the loss of other things that are maybe harder to quantify, but equally important.
Exactly. The mores of our nation and the work ethic of America, you forever changed not just the trajectory, but you changed generations. And you know what else is fascinating? To see the example of the areas that really combated the government. Now, unfortunately, there were all but a handful. However, those are the areas today that thrive. Is this something that you include in the Dissidents film? The areas that push back.
Yeah, I mean, both Jay Bhattacharya and Scott Atlas, who are 2 of the COVID lockdown dissidents we focus on, advised Governor DeSantis. And so we look at the Florida versus California case. And so, I mean, a lot of data was sort of flowing around at the time. What is a COVID death? People would have a heart attack, but if they haven't had COVID, it'd be a COVID death. But as Scott Atlas says in our film, now, years later, it's clear the thing to look at is excess deaths. How many people died that wouldn't have during COVID period that weren't expected to die based on the usual mortality rate? And excess deaths in Florida and California, when you make adjust for age, are roughly the same. California locked down intensely, Florida mildly. So all that lockdown that California did had no impact on excess deaths. What it did have impact on are the things we were just talking about. Kids losing their schooling, suicide, people not seeing their aged parents. So for all that sacrifice, they got no benefit in excess deaths. And it's the same thing in Europe, where Sweden did not lock down and say near neighboring Germany did lock down. And you could look at their excess deaths adjusted for the factors that make them different. And lockdowns had no measurable effect on excess deaths. It was a huge blunder, a worldwide blunder of really horrific consequences and terrible costs. And there are people in America, probably not your listeners, who just don't know that. And they're going to let it happen again. And we really are, we're happy that our film is on the Wall Street Journal website, where we hope to get a very broad audience, maybe people who've never heard these ideas. And I ask your listeners to watch it and get their friends who maybe don't agree with them to watch it. And I think the case is now pretty clear. And you don't have to, look, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about it all and who did what and why, but just the surface of it is bad enough. The provable, uncontested facts are bad enough, and we shouldn't let them happen again.
Yes, and it's something to realize. Aside from the censorship, what followed the censorship, what took the place of information or debate, was unequivocal propaganda that I also didn't think I would see here. I remember talking to a friend of mine whose father fled the Soviet Union, and he's a very, very smart guy. And his father was actually the cousin of Brezhnev.
Hello?
And can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I lost you for a second. But
no problem. I was telling you about a friend of mine his father was the cousin of Brezhnev. And one of the key aspects of how to keep the society placated was propaganda. To see all of the news from coast to coast, from small outlets to big, regurgitate the exact same talking points, never off topic. That was something to live through too, wasn't it? And you being in the film and documentary business, you must have just been in awe how that was just constant propaganda, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. They were all in lockstep. I will have to say that my partner, the Wall Street Journal Opinion Section, is one of the exceptions. They published Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya in March of 2020, way before everybody else, and they consistently wrote supportive editorials and op-eds. But you're right, almost all of the mainstream media, it was like whatever Fauci said, he was their god. And I think part of that is something we haven't talked about. I mean, he was in office for 40 years. He was typical, I think, of the swamp. He had 40 years to develop his power base, to get all the people work for him in important jobs. He had developed his contacts in the media. So Robert Redfield tells the story that in an early meeting of the COVID task force, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, spoke, maybe Alex Azar, head of HHS, spoke, he spoke, and then Fauci spoke, and Fauci said, I'm the expert here. If you have any questions, talk to me. And Robert Redfield said to him afterwards, Tony, you run a lab at NIH. There are like hundreds of labs at NIH. I'm the head of the CDC. What is that about? But the fact is, Tony Fauci seized that power. He had spent 40 years building up his power base, but he was able to seize that power. And part of that was his working in lockstep, both with the, Congress, but also the media. Your very first point.
Yes, what's fascinating too. He was hired 3 months after I was born, and when you look at the scandal that is Fauci, when you look at the scandal through the 80s and 90s, it's not just a great movie that his stupidity inspired the Dallas Buyers Club, but it's amazing the scandals that he really navigated through, and not only wasn't penalized, he was promoted. I mean, it is a legacy.
Indeed.
I think if you look back at his 50-year career, it is a legacy of not just mediocrity, but bald-faced scandal. And you and I are also old enough. I try to tell the kids here who work in the station, there was a time that the economy was so fantastic. You know who went to work for the government? The morons in your neighborhood. The morons. Somebody take a civil service test for this idiot. Or he had a cousin who was elected. Let's put him in charge of trees for the village. This is what it used to be. And somewhere in our lifetime, Michael, these are the people, the lessers among us, who became the gods above us. That's what I'm interested to figure out, because your other documentaries touch on American history, on American ingenuity. It's an amazing transformation that happened during the last 50 years, half a century. How the morons from the neighborhood became the gods who took away your freedoms. Boy, oh boy, are you going to steal that for your next documentary? I won't sue you, I promise, Michael.
All right, well, that sounds good, because I know you can be tough.
No, well, I appreciate this documentary. Now, I know it's palladiumpictures.com, because that's where your other documentary. We can access all your documentaries there, correct?
Yes, and it isn't even the ones we did before Palladium. Our previous company was Manifold Productions, and we have over 15 documentaries that we've done. There's one on Justice Clarence Thomas called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words, one on the war in Iraq, the last 600 meters, and as you say, one's on George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, very appropriate for this weekend of July 4th.
Yes, I'll say so. And before I let you go, I want to play the trailer. Do you mind while I keep you on?
Please.
Thank you.
He got arrested for the act of singing as an act of protest. At the same time, there were, in that summer, huge protests related to the death of George Floyd. Public health responded to this by condemning the anti-lockdown protests. But 1,000 or more public health leaders signed a petition saying that the George Floyd protests were appropriate.
According to this statement, systemic racism is an even bigger public health problem than COVID. It's all ideological. It has no bearing on science or reality.
In fact, Michael, I believe BLM stands for buying large mansions. They stole all that money too, didn't they?
They did indeed. Yes, that isn't actually a trailer. It's a lift from the film. It's a little excerpt. But I think that's another thing that some people have forgotten. We were not allowed to protest COVID or anything else, or even have outdoor. That little clip begins, for listeners who can't see it, with a little clip of someone being arrested for having an outdoor faith, religious service outdoors, and that's no good. He's arrested. But as Jay Bhattacharya says in that little clip, 1,000 health professionals said it's okay to go out and protest BLM because of racism is more important than COVID. I mean, and we listened, and people went along with that. I mean, it sounds patently ridiculous. I think if you went back 10 years and told people that this was going to happen, people would think it's crazy. And it was crazy, but it did happen.
You know what? Another documentary title, Stupidity is Contagious. You should consult Bhattacharya on this, because that's really our issue. If you bought this stuff, it's proof stupidity is contagious. I love your work. I love what you do with your mission and your company. So I want to thank you very much for this documentary and the past ones, but more importantly, making time to say hello to everybody at my show here. So thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great speaking to you.
Thank you. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
He's Sean Thompson.
Hello, Mr. Thompson.
And this is the Sean Thompson